An FBI nominee sat before Congress, sweating under the lights, evading one question after another. This wasn't the usual back and forth of a confirmation hearing, it was a showdown. Senators pressed him on immunity deals, secret testimony, and whispered plans to gut the Bureau from the inside. And the more he spoke, the clearer it became he wasn't there to reassure the country. He was there to protect himself. From the very first exchange, the hearing carried a sense of unease. The nominee admitted he had testified before a federal grand jury in connection with the classified documents case.
Basic humanity. Like a lot of Americans, I really have been horrified by the lawlessness and incompetence and cruelty that we have all witnessed. And for all the talk about going after criminals, you have sidetracked DHS staff who are investigating drug dealers, terrorists, human traffickers, and rather than photo ops, we need more of your focus on providing basic diligence, because your crackdown has roped in American citizens and people who are here legally with no criminal record. Now, I'm not going to ask you whether that was right or wrong. I know it's wrong. The world knows it's wrong. And I think the first thing that history is going to say about your leadership is that you were responsible for many of these travesties. So I'm deeply concerned. You've deported a 4-year-old U.S. citizen with cancer. You've disappeared people to a notorious prison in El Salvador. And you have spent $100 million in taxpayer dollars to air TV ads thanking President Trump. That is really reckless. It's unacceptable, and in my opinion, can't continue. The American people are paying for this with our taxpayer dollars and with their most basic rights. Now, in the last 3 months, you have frozen or canceled over $100 billion in funding that was approved by Congress, bipartisan. We are talking about everything from disaster relief to grants that keep people safe. But when my staff has requested information on the status of this unacceptable holdup, the department failed to provide any acceptable justification. This illegal freeze, and it is illegal, is taking a real toll on communities who are waiting on the investments that Congress has delivered. So will you commit to immediately unpausing these funds?
Well, Senator, thank you for covering a lot of topics there. Let me touch on a few of those right away.
Well,
what the
if
Trump
you could
administration
answer,
is doing
I know
is
you've
enforcing
you
the law for the first time. Under the Biden administration,
I'm asking you about the funds
illegal
that are
aliens were prioritized over American citizens. Now the scales of justice have been leveled, and
Madam
no one
Chair,
is
I'm gonna
treated
reclaim
better
my
than
time
anyone
because
else.
I asked you a specific
Citizens are
question.
treated the same,
Madam
and these
Secretary,
illegal
I know
aliens
your
and criminals
answer.
are being
I heard
deported.
it previously. I'm asking you a
The
specific
grants that you are
question.
referencing,
Correct.
the grants that you are referencing have been paused and reevaluated to make sure that they are truly being spent in the way to which they were appropriated.
Well, these were,
many of these grants were being diverted
Madam
into things they
Secretary,
were never intended
these
to.
funds were passed on a bipartisan basis by members
Absolutely,
in
and
this
the Biden
Congress.
administration perverted them in how they used them, diverted them to facilitate illegal immigration, to house people in places like the Roosevelt Hotel, who held illegal criminals
We're
that took
talking,
the life
Madam
of
Chair,
Laken
about
Riley.
$100
I think all of us
billion.
have
It
recognized
is
that
not credible
the
to
victims
me
here
that
are
all
the
the
people who have
recipients
died
of
and
that,
lost their children because
Madam
of this
Secretary,
situation.
it is not credible, Madam Chair. It is not credible that $100 billion is used to break the law. That just cannot be true. And let me change this a little bit. On the other hand, I am very concerned that DHS is now dramatically overspending funding that Congress has not provided. If you were a CEO doing that, I don't think you'd be in your job long. We need accountability and we need answers. And that includes informative responses to oversight questions sent to the department over the last 3 months. I am ranking member on this committee. I have worked with every member of this committee. We take our responsibility serious to fund your department and others. We need to have answers, we need to have accountability, and we need to make sure you're not overspending money that you were not allocated.
Well, thank you for that question. I will be very
not really a
clear in the
question, it's a
fact.
statement.
Do you want me to respond?
Well, you can.
Well, I've worked many jobs in my life, but I also have been a CEO. I've run
I'm not
businesses. I've been a
questioning your
governor.
credentials. I'm
and it
questioning
is
your spending.
we are prioritizing where our security needs are in this country, and we are hoping that this body will agree that reconciliation is necessary to address the things that have been neglected in this country for too long, that we have the technology upgrades, the manpower upgrades that are necessary. So the $170 billion request for the Department of Homeland Security
Madam
is
Chair, my
incredibly
time is
important to
running
make
out,
sure
and
we
I
have the
do have a
tools that
couple
we
of
need.
additional questions. The fact is that you've not been given this funding. Saying that it's going to come in reconciliation that has not passed is not an acceptable answer. I did want to ask about FEMA and disaster relief. This is really important. A lot of disaster relief has been politicized. You've endorsed eliminating FEMA outright. We have seen an upheaval at FEMA that is going to put lives in jeopardy. 1 in 5 FEMA employees have been pushed out, taking this administration's so-called buyout offer. We are losing indispensable staff just weeks away from fire and hurricane season, and over $100 billion in disaster relief and FEMA grants are still being held up. DHS is making it a lot harder to qualify for relief, something people in my home state of Washington are experiencing firsthand. Multiple requests from governors have been rejected in recent weeks, including a request from our state. And we haven't been given any response about this, and I'm watching this and I'm thinking, has President Trump directed you to prioritize funding for Republican states?
Absolutely not.
Have you directed your staff to prioritize funding to Republican-led states over Democratic
Absolutely
states?
not.
Have
There
your
is,
staff
under this administration, there will not be any politicization of support, relief, FEMA assistance, or grants given based on politics.
Well,
Every single person
there
will be
is a
treated the same.
clear
It will be very
trend.
different.
He acknowledged that he had invoked his constitutional right against self-incrimination, and he confirmed that prosecutors had compelled him to testify only after granting immunity. That admission alone would have been enough to shake confidence. But what followed revealed a pattern that was even more disturbing. When asked what he had actually testified about, he shut down. He reminded the committee that his words were under seal, that only the Department of Justice could release his transcript. But here's the truth many viewers might not know: grand jury witnesses are not bound by secrecy. Prosecutors and jurors must keep quiet, yes. But witnesses, they can share their own testimony freely. Senators reminded him of that. They pressed him again. Still he refused. And in that refusal suspicion grew. If he believed in transparency as he claimed repeatedly, why would he hide behind technicalities instead of simply telling the truth? This is where Senator Cory Booker changed the tone of the hearing. Fighting the flu, Booker still hammered away with the kind of precision that cuts through excuses. He pointed out the legal reality. Nothing prevented the nominee from describing what he told the grand jury. No gag order, no confidentiality requirement. Just a personal decision not to speak. And that personal decision raised the stakes of the entire confirmation. Because silence wasn't about protecting the law. It was about protecting himself. Viewers watching might have felt the tension building. If someone seeking to lead the FBI couldn't answer basic questions about his own past testimony, how could he be trusted to oversee agents across the country? Booker pressed again, asking whether he had witnessed classified material being declassified. The nominee dodged. Booker reminded him, by the law of our land, you are free to tell us what you saw. Still nothing. Each dodge turned the spotlight brighter. Each non-answer revealed a man more committed to survival than to truth. But that wasn't the end of it. Senators dug deeper, asking whether he had promised anyone that he would pursue particular investigations once in office. His answer, a vague line about following the Constitution. Pressed again on whether he had discussed targets with political allies, he repeated the same phrasing word for word. It sounded less like conviction and more like rehearsed deflection. If you listened closely, the silence around the specifics was louder than anything he actually said. And then came the topic of firings. In recent weeks, reports surfaced that multiple prosecutors tied to sensitive investigations had been removed. When asked about this, the nominee flatly denied involvement. But when asked whether those prosecutors were the same ones who questioned him before the grand jury, he claimed he had no idea. Senators reminded him that he was under oath. Still he wouldn't budge. For a man promising transparency, he was remarkably unwilling to confirm even the most basic facts. This hearing wasn't just about past events, it was about the future of the FBI itself. That's why the most explosive moment came when Booker raised a different subject, the nominee's plan to restructure the Bureau. According to their private conversation, the nominee had talked about removing as many as 11,000 personnel. 11,000. He had even floated the idea of shutting down the Bureau's headquarters, the Hoover Building, altogether. And who would replace those thousands of non-political career employees, political appointees? In one of the only agencies in government that traditionally has no such positions, he wanted to install loyalists. Think about that. The FBI, long held up as an independent investigative body, insulated from partisan battles, being transformed into an organization staffed by political operatives. That isn't reform, that's takeover. And Booker made that clear. He accused the nominee of preparing to gut the Bureau from the inside, not to strengthen it but to weaponize it. In that moment the stakes of the hearing crystallized. This wasn't about one man's evasive answers, it was about the integrity of an institution. The nominee's defenders argue that he was simply cautious, that he didn't want to get drawn into public disputes over ongoing investigations. But caution doesn't explain immunity. It doesn't explain the Fifth Amendment plea. And it certainly doesn't explain his refusal to share testimony that he was legally free to discuss. The more likely explanation is far simpler. His answers would have revealed truths too damaging for his nomination to survive. And this isn't speculation pulled from thin air. Over the years, the nominee has cultivated a reputation for loyalty above all else. Critics argue that his career has been less about serving institutions and more about serving powerful allies. His language in the hearing only reinforced that perception. Over and over he spoke about loyalty, about following orders, about honoring the Constitution in broad strokes. But when pressed for specifics, names, actions, details, he shut down. That contrast between lofty words and evasive silence spoke volumes. Some observers might wonder, why does any of this matter? After all, hearings are full of political theater, but this one matters because the FBI isn't just another agency. It carries the power to investigate, to prosecute, to protect national security. And placing someone at its helm who arrives with immunity baggage, with evasions on the record, and with a blueprint to purge thousands of career professionals is more than risky. It's dangerous. And the danger doesn't stop with structural changes. Imagine the chilling effect on rank-and-file agents, knowing their careers could be ended not for misconduct, but for failing to show political loyalty. Knowing their investigations could be shut down, not for lack of evidence, but for crossing the wrong person. That fear alone could bend an institution designed to stand upright. Booker's final words cut directly to that point. He said the nominee wasn't there to lead the FBI, but to hollow it out. And watching the exchange, it was hard to disagree. The nominee had dodged too many times, hidden behind too many technicalities, and avoided too many opportunities for honesty. By the end, the picture was clear. He had something to protect, and it wasn't the law. Let's step back and connect the dots. First, a grand jury appearance, a Fifth Amendment plea, and immunity. Second, a refusal to discuss testimony despite being legally free to do so. Third, vague denials about conversations with political allies. Fourth, a suspicious lack of knowledge about prosecutors recently removed. And fifth, an open plan to restructure the FBI with political appointees. Each of these on its own would raise questions. Together they form a pattern of evasion, ambition, and design. And the design is what matters most, because this isn't just about one nominee, it's about the precedent of politicizing the FBI. Once that line is crossed, it's nearly impossible to walk back. Other institutions have been politicized before, from regulatory agencies to intelligence offices, but the FBI's independence has long been considered sacrosanct. Weakening that independence would mean weakening the very fabric of oversight and accountability in the justice system. Critics warn that we are already seeing signs of erosion. Whistleblowers claim that internal discussions about personnel removals are happening behind closed doors. Former officials warn that installing political appointees would open the door to selective enforcement. And legal scholars point out that immunity deals for senior nominees are virtually unheard of, raising red flags about hidden liabilities. Against that backdrop, the nominee's hearing wasn't just uncomfortable, it was alarming. The most striking moment came when Booker asked, directly and repeatedly, "Did you or did you not testify to witnessing classified documents being declassified?" It was a yes or no question. Instead of answering, the nominee insisted his transcript should be released by the Department of Justice. Booker countered that nothing stopped him from answering now, in public under oath. Still, he wouldn't say yes, he wouldn't say no, he wouldn't say anything at all. And in that silence, a nation saw what it might mean to put him in charge of the FBI. That's why this hearing is more than political theater, it's a warning shot. It shows us the dangers of placing loyalty above law, silence above truth, and politics above justice. Senators may frame it in legal terms, but for the rest of us the question is simpler. Do we want an FBI led by someone who won't even answer the most basic questions about his own past? Because if this is how he behaves under scrutiny, dodging, deflecting, hiding, what happens when the spotlight fades? What happens when he has the power to shape investigations, to assign or remove agents, to decide which cases move forward and which disappear? Those decisions affect not just Washington, but every community across the country. The nominee promised transparency, he promised accountability, he promised to honor the Constitution, but promises are only words, and words without answers are empty. What we saw in that hearing wasn't transparency, it was concealment, it wasn't accountability, it was avoidance, and it wasn't honor, it was evasion. For a moment, consider the long arc of history. Agencies like the FBI were created not just to enforce laws, but to reassure the public that those laws apply equally. Undermining that mission risks undermining faith in justice itself, and faith, once lost, is nearly impossible to rebuild. So when you think about this hearing, don't just remember the dodges and the deflections, remember the bigger warning it carried. If a nominee hides this much before taking office, imagine what he might hide after. If he refuses to answer when senators hold the power of confirmation, imagine how little he'll answer once he holds the power of the Bureau. And that is the sobering truth. The hearing wasn't about past controversies, it was about the future of an institution. It was about whether the FBI will remain independent or become another tool of politics. The nominee's silence gave us the answer he wouldn't say out loud, and the answer should concern every American. So ask yourself, if transparency is optional before power, what will it become after power? If accountability can be dodged at a hearing, what will it look like inside the walls of the Hoover Building? And if the Constitution is just a word to recite instead of a standard to uphold, what happens to the very system it was meant to protect? This was more than a tense exchange. It was a glimpse of what could come, and it left us with one final chilling question. If this is what he hides before stepping into the role, what will he conceal once he controls the most powerful law enforcement agency in the nation? Like, subscribe, and share to keep these hearings in the spotlight. And remember, accountability only works when we demand it.